Thank you so much, Jewel, and hello, y'all. It's very nice to meet you. By way of introduction, my name is Bailey McClain-Avant. I'm originally from a city right outside Atlanta, Georgia. I went to undergrad at the University of Pennsylvania, where I graduated from the Wharton School with a degree in business and Africana studies. And subsequently, after graduating, I joined Spencer Stewart, one of the largest privately owned executive search firms in the world. We span about 70 countries, and we primarily focus on those at the top. And so that's not only vice president level on upwards, but mainly your C-suite levels. So specifically at Spencer Stewart, I sit in our financial officer practice, in addition with dueling in our healthcare practice currently. And so the roles that I'm looking at are chief revenue officers, CFOs, chief accounting officers, controllers, et cetera, across a variety of industries as well. On my financial officer side, I've worked at like $50 million small HVAC roll-ups and people that pump the grease out of McDonald's, really sexy business, all the way up to some of the Fortune 100. And so it's a pleasure to be here with you all today. Part of why I reached out to Jewel and why I wanted to connect with you all is because I'm making it my mission to help the Black community generally and knowing more information about interacting with recruiters, because this was something that I was not familiar with. Neither one of my parents went to college. So when I came into this world, I came into it with a fresh pair of eyes, and I felt like it was necessary to pass some of that knowledge along. I'm really, again, super happy to be here with you today. And Jewel, if you'd like, we can get started. All right, perfect. So I will share screen. Hold on 1 second. Technical difficulties, mental.
Just made you co-host. That might add some more options.
Thank you. All right, perfect. All right, cool. So an introduction into recruiting. So first, we're going to talk about a little bit about like what exactly is executive recruiting. And as you're thinking about your job search, we'll also be getting into a little bit about what are the firms that you should be aware with and the people that you should be connecting with. Then we'll transition into some key points about your resume and both your LinkedIn, because both are super vital in helping to find new opportunities, especially in the age of technology. Then when you're interacting with recruiters, some pointers and tips on kind of information that would be helpful on our end to know. And then at the end, we'll wrap up with some top tips and my contact information. So you guys can feel free to reach out to me afterwards. And I'd love, to have a follow-up conversation or help any way I can. So what is executive recruiting? So if you're on LinkedIn, you've likely run into recruiters either via email or, in your inbox saying, hey, I have like a wonderful opportunity for you. Do you have a couple of minutes to talk? At the highest level, executive recruiting, also known as executive search, they're firms that are hired by corporations to fill specific roles. Within Spencer Stewart specifically, we have chief executive officer, chief financial officer, CHRO, any role that you can think of at the top, we supply kind of a knowledge and expertise of those markets across teams and, different offices as well. There are other firms such as Korn Ferry that you see on the group towards the side that they work on all levels. So that's your senior director level, and maybe once you're in that mid-level manager stage, like trying to figure out how to get the next route up. I think Korn Ferry is a really good organization that to get in contact with. But one thing that's important to note is kind of the difference between staffing agencies and executive search. And so staffing agencies are hired by candidates to help them find roles. And so it would be as if I would pay somebody to help me, given my background, show what are some roles that might be right for me based on my experiences. Executive search firms, on the other hand, are hired by clients to fill roles. And so those are also known as retained search firms. They pay us a minimum of 100K to help find and fill this role. And so that's kind of the difference between the two. And you may run into staffing agencies versus actual search firms. There are also boutique firms as well, depending on the industry that you are looking to enter as well. And so as you're thinking about connecting with folks that are in executive search, it may be good for you to connect with some of the boutique firms. So Isaacson Miller focuses on education, social impact, nonprofit roles. Major Lindsay in Africa is another example for law professionals that are looking for their next role. And as we think about some of the largest executive recruiting firms, we call them Shrek firms. That's another acronym that you'll hear stated. And so it stands for Spencer Stewart, Hedrick and Struggles, Russell Reynolds, Egon Zehnder, and Korn Ferry. Those are naturally, of course, our competitors, but those are some of the biggest firms in the five. Robert Half also has a pretty high standing as well. And I believe Forbes has an article where you can see kind of a list of all the executive search firms or recruiting firms generally, in case you want to do targeted outreach. So that's a little bit about executive recruiting. We're also going to have time at the end for questions. So like I also want to state that. So yeah. Okay, so let's talk about our resume. So what's important when I'm looking at a resume, for example, is that at the top, like I would like to know where you live. It's important to also include contact information, including your phone number and email. Making it more difficult for recruiters to find you helps them present you. It doesn't help in presenting you jobs. And so it would be great if you can include contact information. You don't have to put your entire home address because like for me, I don't have my entire home address on there. It feels a little personal to me, but you know, city and state are preferred just so recruiters can also be targeted in their outreach to you as well. As we move into that executive summary piece, this is an opportunity to showcase some of your professional and also persuasive writing skills. And so if you're having difficulties on that front, like you can also use ChatGPT. There are plenty of prompts that'll help you make a compelling and, you know, really help sell yourself if you're not as strong on the writing area. I know I use it daily. Additionally, if you have specific skills that are unique to your role underneath, it doesn't have to be as big as this section here, but, you know, if you have government contracts experience and that's like unique to your role. I currently live in Washington, D.C., so I see a lot of that on resumes, for example. Sales experience, experience working on certain platforms, coding platforms, et cetera. That would be a great place to put those in. And then what I personally find to be most important is kind of that career overview piece. Now, ideally, you want to be using a SAR method, which is a situation, action, result, when you're describing what you've done in your role. All verbiage should be either in, if you were in the past at that job, like past tense, or keep it consistent. And numbers. If you can quantify the amount and the types of work that you're doing, that gives companies a better gauge of what your performance are. So it's essentially proving yourself via your resume. I've increased sales growth by 150% year over year over the past 5 years. If you're like in sales, or, you know, I've been able to cut down costs in my department by $10 million. If you're able to quantify the work that you've done, it makes it easier in the conversation when the recruiter is asking you, hey, can you tell me about how you were able to drive XYZ? And you also have tangible examples on that as well. Towards the bottom, adding your education credentials. If you have any professional certifications, CPA, MFA, PMP, MBA, any professional or any education and, you know, professional certifications you have, that would be great. And also outside organizations. So that could be if you're a part of the NPHC. So I'm personally a member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, as we all know, historically Black. NABA, which is the National Association of Black Accountants, NSBE for our engineers. If you are a part of any outside organizations that have ties to a cultural organization, I think it's also important to include that in your resume. Legally, we are not allowed to ask you if you're Black, even if I can see with my own 2 eyes that you're Black. So with that being said, it makes it a lot easier if you're putting some of that content there in the bottom. And then stylistically, stylistically, we're thinking Times New Roman, the font size has to be greater than 8. 8 is probably like the smallest you can go, and I'd probably recommend between 9 to 10. Blue or black in color and consistent formatting. I've seen some resumes that have like headshots and like some creative ways. I've found that it speaks more to a professionalism lens, especially if a client is reading your resume, that it's kept as straightforward as possible. Okay, great. Yeah, I'm happy to share the slides afterwards, or I'll send them to Jewel and he can circulate if that works. Okay, great. Okay, LinkedIn. LinkedIn, very similar to your resume. It's essentially an online version of your resume, but it's easier on the recruiter's end. to evaluate profiles. And so I don't have to necessarily look at your specific resume because I have your LinkedIn. I highly recommend making your LinkedIn as comprehensive as possible. And if you are, as you can see, like at the top, he has CFO, finance leader, multilingual, D&I leadership. On our end, LinkedIn Recruiter has a dashboard, and we can put in different keywords that we're looking for the types of individuals that we're looking to hire. And so if I type in keyword CFO in Washington, Robert's profile would come up because it's in his header. So recommend being very thoughtful and intentional about what you put there at the top as well, and as well as your location. There are some roles where they're looking specifically in one location, and if you put United States, you may get lost on our end. So I find it important: location, professional headshot, or nearest major metropolitan area if you don't feel comfortable giving like the actual city that you're in. The about section, very similar to the executive summary, great place to also include the industries and the sizes of the companies that you've worked for. I've also seen on resumes, people put a brief description about what the company is, how big they are, the scale, the number of employees, direct reports, etc. So that's also a place where you can put in both your resume and your LinkedIn. So as you can see, he's the CFO for the association, a portfolio of 3 companies generating greater than $25 million in revenue. It helps us as well gauge the scale of the companies that you've worked at, just so we can make sure that opportunities, again, make sense for where you are. And then very similar to the resume, here is a great place to put as many keywords or relevant words as possible. There's also an option once you go into the actual like job description piece, or the job part. There's a keywords at the bottom where you can also input keywords as well. Okay, good. So very similar again to your resume, you want to make sure that if you've implemented any specific dashboards, done any process improvements, any strategic planning, that should be included within this section. And so led capital raising activities, managed board relations, the number of direct reports, led 7 finance staff. So as quantifying as much as possible, brought down month end close from 7 days to 4 days, generating 1.5 million in net margins. Like that's going to be super important to kind of prove that like you've done the things that you've done and you're ready for the next step. And this also this is a great place to also sell yourself. It doesn't have as many word restrictions as your resume does, because ideally you want to keep your resume down to 2 pages, depending on the amount of experience that you have, but ideally still 2 pages. This is a great place to put in extra information that they can't get on your resume. As well, if you could also include direct reports, the types of companies, public, private equity backed, VC, pre-IPO, if they're the type of company and stage of company that you're at, it also helps us to not have to go and research like, hey, what does this company do? Because it's already in there. And again, the situation, action, result method for describing what you've done in the role. And then finally, again, very similar to your resume, you want to include any professional organizations or associations that you've been a part of, Gamma Nu, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, for example, because again, legally, we cannot ask you for your gender, your race, or any demographic information. And so it's helpful, especially as I'm looking specifically for Black finance professionals, that there's this information in there so I can, it makes my outreach a little more targeted. As well, interacting with recruiters. So when people reach out to you with those recruiting messages, those are actual people behind the screens. So I reach out to people all the time. Not all the time will I get a response, but those are actual people behind the screens, and somebody has to hit send. And so it's important that even if you're not interested, you're happy in your role, you don't like the company, whatever the case may be, still let them know. Because one thing that I've seen is that not only do you gain opportunities from looking at actual job listings, but also networking is super critical and important. And even if it's not now where you may need an opportunity, eventually you can have it in the future, have that contact information. And so it could be as simple as, hi, Bailey, thank you for reaching out. While I'm not currently interested, it would be great if you kept me in mind for future opportunities. You never want to try to close a door with a recruiter, especially if you say, do not contact me again. We will not contact you again. And it may be a case in the future where, you'll need somebody, whether it's you're looking for a role, somebody else is looking for a role. It's a long-term relationship and networking game when working with recruiters. Second point, take/schedule introductory calls to let recruiters know your interests. As we think about the types of companies that you want to work for, if your background is entirely in education and you say, I want to go work in tech, okay, as a recruiter, I would ask you why. And also ask you what is the next step that you're trying to get to. And so those kinds of introductory conversations state kind of what your goals are, what type of company you want to go to, the size of said company. It's great to be flexible, but I also feel like it is helpful on our end when you're a little more specific. The scope of the role. If you're a financial officer, like I want to have accounting and IT and all the different remits, right? And so as you think about the scope of the role, what is the title of the role that you want, and what are the responsibilities that you'd be looking for as a next step in your career? Additionally, relocation or commuting, as you guys are moving further and further up in the corporate ladder, is important. That if you are open to relocation, mean that. If you aren't open to relocation, that is okay. If you are open to travel, I usually pose it to folks that, like, if there's 4 weeks in a month and you have to travel, 1 week is 25%, 2 weeks is 50%, up to what percentage are you comfortable commuting? And with that comes keeping in mind the people that you have at home. And so whether that be kids, a wife, a partner, a dog, like regardless of what happens, keep your stakeholders in mind as you're thinking about commuting and relocation. Because if they do tell you to move, they're probably going to expect you to move if that's something that you said that you were open to. And additionally, compensation expectations. Recruiters are legally not allowed to ask you. If they are, then that's a concern. They're not allowed to ask you how much you make, but you can communicate what your expectations are up front. And also ask them if it's in market as well for like what they're seeing in the roles that they're looking for. It's very much so as much you getting information from them as well as them learning about you. As I stated again at the bottom, the job market is based on networking. And so this is really about long-term relationship building and not really a quick turnaround for opportunities. Be of value to those around you and they will be of value to you. One day you may be a prospect or a potential person or a potential candidate on a search. The next day you might be a source for the recruiter of like great talent that's surrounding you, et cetera. So it's a reciprocal relationship. You just have to be mindful about playing a long-term game. And additionally, when you're reaching out to recruiters, whether it be to schedule these introductory calls or to learn a little bit more about the market, it would be great to do targeted research on who are the consultants that work in your industry and function. Because, for example, I sit in the financial officer practice. I can pass you along to those who work in our HR practice, but I won't necessarily be as great of a help to you because I don't sit in the role that you're looking for, in the example of like an HR professional. So as you're doing research on consultants, just make sure you're finding those who either focus on your industry or your function. Okay, great. Okay, perfect. So top tips, again, for working with recruiters: position yourself as a source of intel on trends in the industry, top talent, and reactions to position specifications. Sometimes I have people that say, you're never going to get somebody to do the job for what you're paying them. And I'm like, you're right. I can take that back to my client and we can pivot based on that. And so position yourself as a source of intel, be of value to those around you, and they'll be of value to you. Second tip, third-party sourcing does exist. And so what that means is you may give me a list of references and you may leave off your boss because maybe you and your boss have a problem or etc. I will still call your boss anyway without your knowledge and say, confidentially, tell me a little bit more about Jewel. What's his working style like? What product has he produced? Like what made him leave his last role, etc. And so it's very good. It's a good approach to thinking about your network and cultivating all kinds of relationships, being very intentional about your relationships with people. Two, it's another way to get on the radar. And so people may ask you like, hey, like, do you know anybody that's good for XYZ? And that's a good way to also get in the radar of others of like, hey, I'm also looking for XYZ if you come across anyone. And then three, it's also a great way to highlight and bring up talent of color. And so I usually recommend my Black colleagues or alumni or peers for roles because those are the people within my network. And it's also helpful to like bring other people up along the way. Three, consider your social media presence. These companies will do full background checks, which include looking at your LinkedIn, your Twitter, your Facebook, Instagram that you currently have, Instagram you thought you deleted, but you didn't. Anything that is on the internet is eligible and not private, meaning your security settings or your page is public, is eligible for to go back to your boss. I've seen finance professionals get knocked for liking some crazy tweets. So just being considerate about your social media presence. Lock your page. That's like if you do have social media, I recommend locking it. And then four, tell the truth. It is not a good look if we find out way down the line through kind of that third party sourcing that you've been laid off and you didn't tell us anything about your departures and transitions. I left this job to take a new role. Great. Just be upfront about it because it's better to get in front of it than to have the person find out later on down the line. Again, and also layoffs, like the economy has been crazy. So like also jobs are understanding if like, due to restructuring, your position got moved or if your role has now been merged into other roles, that's completely fine. Just be upfront about it. Your compensation expectations, again, relocation restrictions, who your decision makers are. And so for most people, it's their partner or their families as well. And then demonstrate consistency in your narrative. Make sure that what you're saying, you're not saying one thing today and like the next thing tomorrow, because then it's kind of hard to gauge like what the truth is. Balance humility with confidence, language capability and ambition without arrogance. And so it is great. All of the things that you've accomplished so far, if you're in this group, I know you've accomplished like wonderful things. It is important to make sure that when you're communicating some of the things that you've done, you're using team language, for example, because you could not have done it alone. That's important. And then as well, highlighting that these are the things that myself and my team were able to accomplish. And here's what makes me most proud. This does not mean that you're the best thing since sliced bread, but more so just stating a little bit more about your capabilities. Demonstrating warm formality when growing a rapport with your consultant. They are not your friend. An executive search recruiter is not your friend, but it does make the conversation go easier if you're nice. But continue to maintain like a professional relationship with that person, I feel like is equally as important. Be clear on your priorities and what you're trying to achieve, as well as what impact you're making and you want to make. I feel like that's pretty straightforward. Use websites like Glassdoor or salary.com to find out more on compensation ranges if somebody isn't like forthcoming on them by themselves. As well as reaching out to those that are currently in the role that you're looking for is equally as helpful to know what kind of responsibilities and capabilities that you'd be looking for in your next role. Okay, great. So that's the end. Totally open for questions. Here's my contact information as well, both my work email and my LinkedIn. And so happy to walk through resumes, LinkedIn's, talk through, just throw paint at the wall and see what sticks as far as helping you guys in your career journey. And I thank you again for your time.
Bailey, I want to thank you so much for the presentation here today. Folks, we're so fortunate to have experts in their fields come right to us. I mean, some guys may be home, sitting on their couch, or some might be at their desk working. It's Juneteenth, so day off for many of us, although we're an international organization. So for others, it's not. But the real point is the opportunity that we have to get, I'd say, top tier information on how we need to present ourselves, be it resumes, interactions with recruiters, you name it. So I hope you're taking some notes here, although this is being recorded. We'd like to talk about it, that networking is happening real time. Bailey's here now. Bailey's a recruiter now. So Bailey is watching all of us right now and making decisions about us right now. She's very polite, but that's what's happening. So, and we love that, right? Because then it makes every moment an opportunity. So 3 things, Bailey, I want to just share as a framework, and then we're going to open it up. Guys, trust, promise. I'm going to step back. I want you guys to step forward with, this is a job search group. So there are guys that are actively looking for their next best values aligned role that have real questions. And I know this can be, I can read people really well, and I can tell you that Bailey can handle hard hitting questions that fast. I was like, oh yeah, we got a real one, and we're gonna get some real answers. So please do bring your real questions. But folks, I want to encourage the guys that have questions about recruiters and exec search, and search firms. Please, if you don't mind, step to the front of the line, because that's one of Bailey's expertise that some of our other speakers may not have that expertise. Just briefly, as a framework, I talk about 3 ways that folks often get a job. Number 1, cold applying. Go on the website, you go on Glassdoor, submit your resume, you apply, cross your fingers, hope for the best. Second way, recruiters reaching out to you using their algorithm on their kind of version of LinkedIn and maybe some other platforms, and finding you. The third one, we talk about the hidden job market. So this is going to be your network, your extended network, reaching out to people cold over at Google and saying, I'm looking to learn more about this industry, hopping on that 15, 20, an hour, if you hit it off with them, phone call, learn about things, be curious, what's their experience, circle back to ask for a referral after you've done some more research. So the first call really is about trust building, because they're evaluating you on that first call, building trust. But that's just my method. We're all adults. We get to move in the ways that work best for us. So I just wanted to put that out there, and that one of the things we have an opportunity, which we don't always have to focus on, is the recruiter, headhunter, search firm. What are these terms? How do they work? Which firm should I be looking for? Bailey already touched on that, which I loved as well. Please ask that question here today as well. That's it. I'm going to take a step back. Bailey, you're actually registered here as a co-host, so I think you can, have all the controls to like mute, unmute, and pick who you want next and answer questions in the chat. So I'm just going to have you take it from here if you don't mind.
No, that's great. Thank you. And I already saw a question in the chat from Albert. I mentioned that it is illegal to ask for race. Why does every job application ask for race? Mainly companies use it internally to understand what are the types of applicants, and also to be cognizant of who they're hiring into these roles. Usually that's an HR thing. But I can't look at you and assume that you're Black based on how you look. And so that's why it's important to put some of those professional organizations that you're a part of in, your LinkedIn and your resume. So I don't have to assume. I know, there's white people in NPHC too. Like, it is still that's an organization that you're a part of. And I can, slot you into whatever category I need from there. And then secondly, you've spoken with a recruiter at Spencer Stewart, offer a referral from a mentor. You had one discussion in late April, and she mentioned your information will go into a database. I followed up a month later. She said, we are absolutely keeping you top of mind, and the Spencer Stewart team knows to reach out directly for opportunities that might be a good fit. Is this a standard process? Yes. So that is standard process for introductory conversations. And so how it works is that we have a database with like tens of millions of people in it across the globe. And so what happens when you send your resume to us is we input that information into our database, including like the types of roles that you've been in, what companies you've been at, etc., as well as your resume. We have a tool that kind of chops and slices the information based on what criteria we put in. I want the chief executive officer with XYZ, background, or has companies in this industry, right? And then that's when the names would auto populate for us of like, okay, here's what I generated based on that criteria that you put in. And so that is standard process for your information we put into that database. There's a couple of different things that could be happening. Given the type of role that you're currently in, it could be that you're not coming up on the radar for one reason or another. And secondly, the types of opportunities that are presented. And so we never know what clients we're going to get. People usually either come to us or like we pitch for work. And so we never really know what opportunities we're going to get. So if it seems slower or whatever the case may be. That's usually because the market is always fluctuating, and how busy or less busy we are is very dependent on the market. And so, for example, like right now is very slow. Everyone's on vacation, their kids are out of school, they're not really working like that. Budgets come out at the end of usually like end of October ish. And so you'll see now people realize they have enough money to like hire a new person given how much budget they have left. And so you'll see at different time periods as well, like when there's an influx of jobs versus when the market is a little slower than usual. Does that answer your question?
No, yeah, that's definitely really helpful. I appreciate it. And one thing to add to that, like I said, I've talked to people like yourself, but then also you hear the term, now I say staffing agency, headhunter, many different terminology, but I've seen some people that, actively put your resume in front of clients, and then like yourself, clients hire you guys to then find someone for someone. Um, I don't know. I've seen I guess both methods can kind of work. The person that would actually more proactively put my resume in front of people,
Mhm.
that I have some people doing that for me. Would they be considered, is that more of a staffing agency or is that the headhunter title? I don't know.
Yes. So usually headhunters are hired by individual corporations or they work at an executive search firm like myself. Staffing agencies are exactly like you mentioned it. Like they're the ones putting your resume in front of different opportunities. And it could also, and it on an executive search side as well, if your resume came across my desk and I'm like, oh, like he's missing this key experience that the client is looking for, it could be that like we may have looked at your background, but we didn't see that like your background, I guess, like rose to the top of the types of experiences that the client would be looking for. So that's kind of like, yes, that's the main difference is like, what does the client want versus like, here are the opportunities that are better fit for your background. Does that make
I know
sense?
we've already, oh no, perfect. I know we've already connected on LinkedIn, and I'll send you a separate note. Maybe we can have an additional call and I could tell you who I've been working with and maybe try to connect the dots. And I appreciate any help you can give.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I saw GE was a great company.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Amika, Amika, I saw. I hope I pronounced that right. I'm sorry. It's Juneteenth.
It's okay.
Um,
The method.
Amika, nice to meet you.
Pleasure to mine. Just real quick, there's going to be some noise in the background. I'm out with the family. Um, just so the question that I have is that back in the day when we used to apply to LinkedIn, right? There was a lot more traction there, and the amount of applicants were not as crazy. Like right now, you can go in there and you see a job that was posted 3 days ago already has three forms of access, right? These are senior level jobs and things of that nature. So I'm starting to think I then diverted to a strategy of just trying to find a connection. Don't even submit through LinkedIn because I started to feel as though no one is even looking at those resumes because it's just so many. And there's a finite amount of resources of recruiters that have to go through 400 applicants or resumes for one job, and they might have 4 or 5 jobs that they're looking for. So I'm starting to think that it's not that you're not qualified, is that you are thrown in the mix of unqualified, qualified, semi-qualified, whatever the case may be, and then they have to sift through. And if they don't get to your resume, then you're out of luck. So I started to just go directly to someone I know that someone I know that knows someone that works there and submit you that way. Is there an advantage of doing it that way versus the LinkedIn route? I'm trying to figure out exactly what strategy for me would be moving forward.
Yeah. First, thank you for your question. And then secondly, I do think there's merit in doing both. I think it's easier to have when you're having a personal connection, someone that knows somebody that is directly at the company. Recruiters get a bad rep, reasonably so. Mainly because for that reason that you spoke about of like sometimes resumes either don't get lost or don't get touched. They're working with limited resources, which is why some of those keyword points that I was bringing up earlier of like if they're using there's now technology that makes it easier for recruiters to go through resumes and they're picking up on keywords. And so for whatever role that they're trying to fill, whether it be um, a financial planning and analysis manager, right? If you have financial planning and analysis in your resume and the platform pulls it up, it's more likely that your resume gets brought to the top. And so I think there is merit in doing it both ways, being as comprehensive as you can on LinkedIn and on through your resume, but also having a personal connection with somebody else. Because I've had people that are like, hey, like I see through the grapevine, you have an interaction with this person, like, do you know someone at this firm that can help me like make sure my resume gets to the right people? Usually the people that are in the department, because I've also seen people reaching out to those in the department that are like, hey, like I applied for a role within your department. That's usually not as helpful because the resumes don't go to them. It goes to HR before it hits their desk. And so it would likely be what I would see to be more strategic is if like you would talk to either a recruiting professional directly at the firm or somebody in HR that can have a follow-up conversation. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's helpful. So basically, let me try to reiterate what you said to make sure I have an understanding. I think the best strategy that you've outlined is trying to reach out to a recruiting professional within that company and having a direct interaction relationship with them. But sometimes, like you said, the recruiter is non-added to that job specification, right? So the recruiter's name is not there. So you would have to, if it's a large company, you have to sift through 10,000 records to figure out who the recruiter is. And it's a shot in the dark, right? You might get a recruiter that is not willing to take you further, doesn't have the resources or the time to do that. Is there some sort of function that allows you to specifically search for, to narrow it down? So at least you're within striking distance of who you need to speak with regarding a particular role.
So if I heard you correctly, you're asking me, is there something that shows like what specific experiences we're looking for, like on our end, to then brings your resume up? Is that what you're asking me?
No, you mentioned reaching the recruiter directly, right? And if in some roles you have recruiters there, the names or whatever the case may be, you can reach out to them, and some don't. And in those cases, should you would have to search the company or you'd have to search and do your research on LinkedIn for maybe recruiter. You might type in recruiters there, and it'll bring out everyone as a recruiter in that firm, right? Mm-hmm. How do you then start to sift through, all right, which recruiter do I reach out? Do you just start like playing Russian roulette and just hit a recruiter and decide, okay, can you help me point to the right person?
Yes. So, okay, I understand now. So sometimes the recruiters themselves will have a blurb at the bottom, like I focus on XYZ, and that should also help you like in your search. Additionally, it is possible that if you do the Russian roulette of like reaching out to somebody, I would put a tagline at the bottom of, if this isn't the types of opportunities that you work on, do you mind pointing me to the person that does? So even if they're not able to help you, they're able to point you in the direction of somebody that can help you. But it's kind of a mix of both. Sometimes you can hope that they work, like if it's not directly listed on the job description, that it is on LinkedIn, but it is kind of like luck of the draw. I'm sorry, that's not the answer you may want to hear. Okay. Did I answer? Are you good?
Sorry. Yeah, I'm good. Sorry, talking on mute. My son was acting up. Thank you very much.
No, it's okay. Okay, great. Alex?
Hello, Bailey. Thanks for taking my question and for facilitating this great conversation. So, one of the things one of my questions for you is, given that you work in the financial officer's practice, is what are some of the key, I think, attributes that corporations are looking for in VP candidates in finance? So, there's been this transition away from the traditional accounting focus to serving as a strategic partner and value creator that is engaged in data driven decision making, functional and cross functional collaboration. So, but are there any other themes that you would maybe kind of call out that you're seeing and what firms are looking for? Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Alex. That's a great question. And so you're right, they are moving away from the traditional like accounting next step up, you move through a controller, chief accounting officer, et cetera. They're now looking for more financial planning and analysis. Companies have been having a very difficult time managing their budgets, especially like post-COVID with the influx of like pandemic money and et cetera. So financial planning and analysis I see is one trend that those are skewing a little bit more towards. It depends on the type of company. Those that are high growth usually look for those with mergers and acquisitions experience or business development experience as well. But what I'm seeing more often is that at the top, CFOs are going through almost all remits of accounting. So they've had a year or two in IR, they've had a year or two in accounting, like a year or two in FP&A, if IR, if you're a public company, or treasury as well, or one of their roles is combined treasury. I've seen treasury and IR more often put together, or just general like VP of finance. But you're right, they are moving towards a strategic and more operational CFO, more strategic versus an operational CFO, somebody that makes sure the books is closed. These companies are looking to grow as exponentially as they can. And so I say FP&A and M&A would probably be like the two areas of finance I see like more CFOs getting a little dangerous in. Is that helpful?
That's great. Thank you so much.
Of course. Delando?
Hi, Bill. Yeah, thank you for doing this. Of course, my recent role was with.
Really quick, folks. Just a second, folks. Delano, we are going to jump right back in with you. Bailey, you're doing a phenomenal job. Thank you, everyone, for the questions. Folks, in the chat briefly, if you don't mind, if you can put, if you want to, right, however much you want to share here, but in the chat, what role maybe do you have? What role are you looking for? That way we can just do a quick scan of maybe industry, where you're looking. Bailey can see that as well. And after we get to Delando and Ibrahim, we can even maybe go into some rapid fire pieces of like advice for each people, possibly. I don't know, but this can give her a better understanding of who's in the room. All right. So folks, if you want to be active in that way, please do. Now's the time. Delando, back to you.
Thank you. So yeah, thanks, Bailey. Of course, I was in the executive search firm myself, but more specifically in higher education practice. But just wanted to see from your perspective, do you advocate, does your firm advocate in practice for, I guess, rising star or certain candidates that you all would like to see in the pool that might not have the typical requirements that the position might have, but again, advocating that way to try to see, what's the best person to fit the role and fit the needs of the client that you do have?
Yeah, so I think, so it does happen, to answer your question, it does happen. I think it usually comes through a personal connection that somebody has with the person more typically, and that's because that person is able to speak to their story, because both as recruiters, and you know this as well, like we can only see as much as like what's on the paper, as well as like having a conversation to see like where those experiences make sense. And so there may be things on your resume, of course, that like I won't know about until we have a conversation and you're able to like walk me through some of those things. And so it does happen, but it usually comes from a personal connection, where somebody is able to explain your story if you don't have the traditional background, depending on like where you want to go. Is that helpful? Is that, yes, helpful?
Yeah, it does. But how often, I guess, do you do that?
I personally have a database of Black professionals that I keep in touch with and advocate for, but I know not everyone does that. I'm also like the only Black person in my practice, if that's also that's also important context. So as we think about traditional connections, and these aren't necessarily people that I've spoken with, but more so I make it my mission to do so. But it doesn't happen. That's not everybody's case. But I would say it honestly like depends on the search, depending on how often like it comes up. But for me, I do it pretty often, but I know not everyone does, because not everyone is of that mindset of like, oh, let me think about this person. They're going to think about the typical person, unless they can directly speak to your background.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was like, I hope that's helpful. Okay, Ibrahim?
Yes, thank you. So two questions. One, I know you had mentioned as far as, being honest, and obviously you also said with the rise in layoffs and just changing in reorgs that's happened recently. So sometimes looking at a resume at a glance, it looks like you're job hopping when you actually have legitimate reasons, whether it be, those external factors or just not a great fit. But you obviously don't want to be blackballed or not even considered because of your first glance look. So how do you kind of walk that thin line? Because obviously you want to tell the truth, but I obviously don't want to get discounted because my resume, unless you talk to me and I can explain it, sometimes you don't have enough time for you to let me give this person a chance. You just kind of go based off of, or the hiring manager, you know what, they've had, you know, X amount of jobs in the last X amount of years, but are you not cognizant of the current economy that we're in? So it's a little bit disheartening sometimes, because of course I want to tell the truth, but you also have to play the game how it's played as well, respectfully. I'm not trying to advocate for lying, so please,
Yeah.
the recording.
Yeah, no, and you're right. It is tricky, right? Because if you have like if you're switching jobs like consistently every 2 years, it causes the client to question like, okay, like how long are they going to stay at my job before they go somewhere else? But you're right, like there are definitely times where there's legitimate reasons. Now I can say what is a good search professional, i.e. somebody that's like an actual like, you know, is attentive to their job versus those who aren't. For example, I know Nike just went through a very major restructuring. So I have a lot of Nike people that like I'm in conversation with, for example, but not everyone has like that knowledge if they're not like in tune with the business market. Um, with that being said, I think that if there are legitimate reasons, then that's something that you can have a conversation with the recruiter directly about. And whether it be like, I just like to preview my background with you in case, if not for this opportunity, then others that you have in the future. Um, but also like, I completely understand. And so I think about it two ways, right? Because what I've seen more often is that people of color, including Black people, usually switch jobs more often in order to gain higher pay raises because we're not making the same amount as our counter peers, right? So I keep that in mind when I'm looking at backgrounds, because I'm like, okay, it's often that they may have not have been eligible for whatever pay raise or promotion or whatever the next step was. And thus why they left to go find a new job where they can get compensated for their talents. Again, that is a me thing. That is not an everybody thing. And so, off first glance, just like you said, people might discount because they see that you're, you know, moving like every year or so, right? Um, I think unless they ask you directly, I would say, you know, just walk through your background kind of as is. And if you want to mention that in your conversation, then I say, by all means. But you also can position it as you having a variety of breadths of experiences, giving your roles at these various types of companies and industries that you're being able to use to your advantage. That's like another way to kind of like spin it. So that way you're not necessarily saying like, oh, like, you know, I got reorged out or whatever the case may be. Like you're also leveraging the experiences that you have had at those opportunities for your next opportunity.
Of
Does that
course.
make sense?
No, it definitely makes sense. You know, obviously it's a different type of market currently.
Yeah.
So with that also being said, do you, you know, just from your experience or just from your viewpoint, do you see it kind of swinging back anytime soon to not the great resignation time piece, but at least something that's a little bit more normal? I think companies right now are operating a little bit more lean. So they're obviously hiring less. Operating costs, it costs too much to hire people due to inflation. So they're obviously hiring less, trying to retain more, but that's also going to backfire, you know, later because people aren't happy where they are and they're just doing what they can until things swings back.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because last year was a very hard year for all corporations, Spencer Stewart included, right? Like we were not doing well, and everyone had very high. 2022, I want to say, was like was a pretty good year for companies, in terms of like revenue. 2023 was very difficult for whatever the case may be. And so you're right, they have been operating much leaner. I am seeing it gradually, maybe not as like pre-COVID times, but like it's gradually starting to increase. But the budgeting is starting to be a little bit more tight. And that's because everyone over indexed like post COVID. And so now they're trying to recoup some of those costs because they took a loss in those years. So I am starting to see it come back, but it is still pretty narrow. I suspect again towards the end of the year when budgets, you know, people realize like, hey, I've got an extra, you know, couple $100,000 that I could use to hire somebody else. Like that's when you'll start to see more opportunities. But as of right now, the summer is just typically a little slower from a timeline perspective. But I do see it going up between, I would say, like September to like November.
Got you. And sorry, I don't mean to take up all your questions.
No.
Respectfully, it also, I hear you and agree with that. But then when companies have these record profits, but they're still trying to save money, it doesn't add up. And again,
Yeah.
I'm not in their shoes, but it's like, oh, we don't have enough money to keep people. but you just did record profit, not just regular profits, record profits. So it's kind of, you know, don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining.
Yeah, no, I get you. And I feel like capitalist mindset, right? We have record profits that are for us. They're not for y'all.
That's
So,
right. That's right.
they're not for you. They're for the people that are. If I deal with CFOs. If y'all just take a look at y'all favorite company CFO and how much money they make, it makes me sick. It's absolutely sickening how much money these people make, and they just reorged tens of thousands of people out of the job. I'm like, are you dead right now? But sorry, professional.
Sorry.
No, it's
Totally
definitely
okay.
not fair. But I do understand where you're coming from and like why it's frustrating. I do see budgets being much leaner, but also again, them profits are not for us. They're not for the common people. They're for the people at the top and for their board members who they're also paying equal executive level salaries to make decisions on like the route of the company. So I feel you, friend.
But folks, this is and it's tricky, right? Because many of us are trying to get that money too, you know. Trying to get
hello,
to that CFO role.
hello.
But the other thing is just as far as time, we got 4 minutes and a hard stop, like Jewel hitting end at
Sorry,
4 minutes. So folks, these have been phenomenal questions. I want to move into like 2 minutes of like rapid fire questions. Please drop your questions in the chat box for Bailey. Bailey, we can just have you just 1 sentence, 2 sentence, you know, just like answer. Let's see what we can do, see if that even works. But Bailey, if you also have a you know, kind of something you want to close with, or maybe how to reach you again, let's take a minute or two for that. Folks, if you don't mind, just dropping any final questions, and then Bailey just rapid fire answering if you're all right.
Yeah, no, that's great, Jewel. And okay, perfect. So I will also put my LinkedIn in the chat for anyone. I would like to answer Christian's question, so if you could put that in the chat, that'd be great. Final words, I would say always send a thank you note. I was thinking about that as we were talking earlier. Always send a thank you note, even if the conversation didn't go well, even if they weird, like still send a thank you note. It shows your appreciation and also shows like your level of professionalism for even like making the time to speak with somebody else. Additionally, the job market is tough, but it is not impossible. And so I have hope, and I'd like to help each and every one of you in the best way that I can in navigating that. Finally, it's Juneteenth, so like celebrate Black liberation and freedom today if you can. Okay, great. How can I test decision makers in the hiring process in as many ways as possible? So the best way to touch decision makers is again like through your easiest touch point is going to be the recruiter, mainly because they're the ones that are looking at your background and passing it along to the relative decision maker. Now, I mentioned earlier, you might find the head of the department on LinkedIn, for example, but they may not necessarily see your application till it's all the way at the end. And so in order to find people that are earlier in the process, you can usually it's the recruiter that's for that specific topic that would be like the best person to reach out to, and they'll put you in front of the decision makers as you go through the interview process. But LinkedIn, telling your story and inspiring others, that's kind of my helpful. I guess that's as helpful as I can get. Okay. Wait, I got one more. Hold on. All that said, can you talk about whether your U.S.-based clients strictly seek talent in America or globally? It depends on the client, but usually they will. If you are global, usually global people are the ones that will reach out to you, but occasionally they will want. Not often though. It's like pretty rare that they want somebody like overseas for my U.S.-based clients. But usually those that are domesticated elsewhere, they'll be the ones that you want to get in contact with. Scene. Drops mic. Boom.
The mic has been dropped, folks. Please, yeah, Albert. Yeah, the round of applause, right? You know, we have recruiters here in real time with real connections, access to real roles that want to see you all win. Showed up on a day off to provide the support. And guess what, guys? we all showed up too. So this is collaborative in nature and energetically, and we're going to move forward with that. Bailey's given us her LinkedIn, so that's something to hopefully follow up on. Hopefully, Bailey, we can have you back in the community again in the future. Folks, we're going to wrap for now. I will drop her LinkedIn link in the group chat as well, and we'll take it from there. Happy Juneteenth, everybody. Take care.
Take care. Thanks, Jewel.
Thank you.
Thanks.